I went from doing sales at the mall, selling photo sessions. I went from doing that to selling cars eventually. And selling cars is where it's at. I got to meet several individuals that didn't even go to college or dropped out of high school that was making $250,000 a year to $500,000 a year. And those were the guys I focused on. I didn't care about the ones that came in, they were making minimum wage. There's 80% of the car salespeople out there make minimum wage. I only cared about the ones that were making a lot of money. So I wanted to follow those guys as mentors. I was like, hey, man, maybe these guys can teach me something. Turns out most of those guys were sleazy. They weren't really like being honest to customers. They would tell the customer they're on a 6-month lease when they were on a 60-month finance. Little tricks like that. They'd lie to customers. Lie, cheat, and steal. That's what gave the used car sales people bad names back in the day. So anyway, I didn't like that and I never followed their tactics. I didn't lie to customers. I found a way to be creative enough with the facts to convince a customer that it was still a good deal. I didn't have to lie to customers. I just worked harder on explaining it to a customer in a way that it made sense. At one point I was like, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a sense maker, you know. The guy says he wasn't gonna buy a truck because it didn't fit in his garage or whatever. I was like, well, you knew the garage was small when you bought the house. Like, you know, you can park the truck in the driveway. He's like, yeah, you're right. Things like that. I became the number one salesperson by working harder than anybody else because I didn't want to go back to being homeless. That's what gave me an incredible work ethic. I would literally come in on every day off and work hard. I never stood around the dealership in one of those circle meetings where they all just trade stories and share stories and one guy was always the popular of the group and everyone would stand around, listen to him and try to be cool with him. That guy would always talk crap about me, but I was on my third customer of the day before they even had one customer because I would bring the customers to me. Back in the day, I would go in the newspaper because there was no internet and I would look for people selling their cars and tell them to bring the car in, let me appraise it and trade it in. And I got a lot of customers that way. I would go to the service department while customers were getting their car fixed and I would talk to them about maybe trading in their car and I'd get customers out of there. I'd have 4 or 5 customers when half of the dealership only had one customer because all they would do is wait for customers to walk in. I was a hustler. I was the number one salesperson everywhere I went. I worked harder and I worked smarter than any other salesperson. And I was able to avoid getting felonies. So I was able to, become a salesperson. I quickly rose to the number one position at any store I went to. It was never good enough. I became the number one salesperson. Here I had to go to another store that was bigger and had more aggressive salespeople. And I had to become the number one salesperson there. I hated the politics in the new car dealerships. They suck. You walk into a store, you have to prove yourself. You prove yourself, and instantly all the people there that were making good money hated you because you were going to mess up their gig. So they would sabotage you. They would talk trash about you, complain about you to the managers. They would steal your customers and steal your deals, unfairly steal your commissions. It sucked working at the new car stores. I probably lost more money than I made in commissions due to salespeople skating you, backstabbing you, taking your customers, cheating you out of a deal. I probably gave away more commissions than most salespeople made by splitting deals with other salespeople. But it's okay. I was my own economy. I went into a dealership. I generated more business. One thing that was always true is if I walked into your dealership Your dealership was going to break records. It was going to break records in sales. It was going to break records in volume, gross, you name it. I was my own force. I sold more cars. I added. A lot of salespeople might come into a dealership nowadays and they'll sell 20, 30 cars, but they're taking out of the pool. You know, if the dealership sells 100 cars, they still sell 100 cars. They're stealing from other salespeople, or they're taking from those salespeople. If I walked into a dealership that sold 100 cars and their best month was 110, they would sell 120, 130 with me there because I was generating my own business. When I became a sales manager or a closer or a finance manager, I would always beat their top person at that store. So if the top closer was selling 60, 70 cars a month, I'd come in and in the second or third month, this guy who hasn't been beaten for 7 years at this Toyota store, Jim Pavone, if you ever see this, man, I love you, bro. But you know, I kicked your ass and you loved me for doing it. You haven't been beaten in 7 years and I beat you my second month there as a closer. And everybody knew who I was. And at first people would hate me or hate on me. They became my biggest fans. John Unruh, he works for me now. He was the #1 internet sales manager, never got beaten. I beat him my second month in internet sales. A finance manager. I'd go into a store that would struggle to do $1,200 a copy. I would do $2,000. The last dealership I went to, I'd make $4,000 per copy profit at a Toyota store. I was that good. And I didn't lie, cheat, or steal. Never had to. So I became really good at this business. And the better you do, they always cut you. So they always cut your pay plan. They always cut your money. They take from you. So most dealerships say, oh, you don't need to make more than 10, 12, 15 grand a month. If you're making 20, 25, they change your pay plan next month. And they raise the bar. They extend the carrot on the stick, you know. So it sucked, you know, and it was unfulfilling. I was working harder and harder to take people's hard-earned money for the dealerships. It sucked. You know, they would praise you. They would celebrate you if you made a lot of money on a customer. There's this guy on TikTok. I think his name's Kenny Sells or whatever. He's being ridiculed right now because he made a post on TikTok on overcharging a single mother $10,000 on a Honda. Everybody hates him. He's being canceled right now. And I guess he thought that was cool to post. He actually made it to the news. Milwaukee and Chicago, he was on the news for posting it on social media. And what's crazy, this is what's crazy. Behind the scenes, you do that. This happens all the time, by the way. He's not the first one or the only one that's done something like this. This happens every single day in the car business. And they celebrate you. They high five. They, you know, oh my God, this guy, and 10 grand's nothing, man. I've seen people make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, especially during the COVID markup. Everybody was making 10 grand over. Everybody. And they'd celebrate it. And they'd talk like you are the best, you know, they'd praise you. So I guess the guy, what his mistake is, he went looking for praise outside of his circle. And that outraged the community. But I was never a fan of it when I worked in the car business. Salespeople would make 20, 30 grand sometimes over sticker price. Now, granted, most of the times it wasn't on a single mother. It was on someone who was making 50 grand a month or 100 grand a month that could afford to pay, you know, 20 grand over on a Toyota Sequoia Pro or Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro or whatever. The new Corvettes, when they came out, were 50 grand over. It's a very common thing to sell cars over sticker. It sucks when you take advantage of hardworking people who don't make a lot of money. The #1 trick dealerships do is they don't close you. They don't tell the customer the total price of the car. They don't tell them, here's the MSRP, here's what we're selling it to you for. They avoid that. They try to close the customer on a comfortable monthly payment for them. And if a single mother goes into a Honda dealership and she could have gotten that minivan for $399 a month, but they sell it to her for $799 a month, and she can make the payment because she gets approved. Likely they'll lie on the customer and come to the bank. I've seen that happen a lot of times, and that's probably what they've done on most of those deals. Oh, this customer makes $5,000 a month when they make $3,000. And the customer really wants the minivan, and they convince her that, hey, you're paying, or they switch them from a finance where it was going to cost $800 a month to a lease where it cost $700 a month. And that's how they get them. They could have paid $399 a month. And they think, oh, a lease is $100 a month cheaper, but they mark the price up $10,000. They lie to the bank about their income. All these dirty little tricks that car salespeople do. Managers are all in on it. The owners and the GMs pretend like they don't know, but they know. At the end of the month, it's always the same goal. Put as much money on the books as you can.